Welcome to the Undercover Insights channel. Today, I'm going to tell you about the story. An arrogant cop thought his badge made him untouchable, but when he crossed paths with a calm yet fearless woman in a tense supermarket showdown, everything changed. What he didn't know? She's a decorated military colonel. Witness how her unwavering courage turns the tables in this jaw-dropping story. Colonel Alexandra Hayes walked into a small neighborhood grocery store in Houston, Texas, on a warm Sunday afternoon. Dressed casually in a white t-shirt, blue jeans and sneakers, she looked like any other shopper navigating the aisles for essentials. With a career as a decorated military leader who had commanded troops in some of the most challenging battles, Alexandra's humble demeanor disguised her indomitable spirit and discipline. This was her moment of peace after years of fighting for justice, integrity, and accountability. But peace would not last long. At the end of an aisle, Officer Ryan Barrett, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, wearing a crisp police uniform, was browsing the shelves. As he reached for a packet of chips, he accidentally knocked over a bottle of soda and a box of noodles. The items tumbled to the floor, scattering messily across the aisle. Barrett glanced down briefly, shrugged, and began to walk away as if nothing had happened. Alexandra stopped in her tracks, watching his casual disregard. Years of military discipline had instilled in her an unwavering commitment to accountability, and seeing someone in a position of authority act so carelessly triggered something deep within her. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Excuse me, sir," she called out. "You just dropped something. Perhaps you should pick it up so others won't have to deal with the mess." Barrett froze mid-stride, turning to face her with a cold, scrutinizing glare. His expression morphed into a smirk, dripping with condescension. "And who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" he sneered. "I've got more important things to worry about than some noodles and soda." The air between them grew heavy, the tension palpable. A few customers paused their shopping, their curiosity piqued by the sharp exchange. Alexandra, unfazed, maintained her composure, her piercing gaze meeting Barrett's dismissive eyes. "As a police officer," Alexandra replied, her tone steady, "you have a duty to set an example for the community. Picking up after yourself is not just polite, it's the bare minimum of respect." Barrett let out a mocking laugh, stepping closer to her. "Respect? Do you think you can lecture me about respect and responsibility? You don't know the first thing about what it means to wear this badge. Maybe focus on your own life instead of interfering with mine." The murmurs in the supermarket grew louder. Some customers began filming the confrontation on their phones, sensing that this was more than just an argument over spilled groceries. Alexandra could feel the weight of their stares, but she stood firm, her posture unwavering, her resolve unshaken. Years of facing high-stakes situations on the battlefield had taught her that calm, deliberate action was more powerful than rage. "This isn't just about the groceries," Alexandra said, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "You're wearing a uniform that represents service, protection, and integrity. Whether you realize it or not, your actions reflect not only on you, but on every officer in this city. If you can't take responsibility for something so small, how can the community trust you to handle greater responsibilities?" Barrett's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered, doubling down on his arrogance. "Listen, lady," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're just another civilian with too much time on your hands. Don't act like you have any authority over me. I'm the law here." Alexandra's eyes narrowed, her anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. His words were not just an insult. They were emblematic of the abuse of power and systemic prejudice she had fought against her entire career. She took a deep breath, her voice firm but measured. "Power," Alexandra said, her tone icy, "is meaningless if it's used to oppress rather than to protect. You think that badge makes you untouchable, but let me remind you, it's not a license to disrespect the people you serve. Accountability comes for everyone, including you." The crowd, now fully invested, murmured in agreement. Barrett's bravado began to crack under the weight of the attention. He glanced around, noticing the cameras pointed in his direction, and shifted uncomfortably. But instead of apologizing, he lashed out once more, his voice rising. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he barked. "You don't know anything about me or what I deal with every day. Maybe people like you should learn to stay in your lane." Alexandra's gaze remained unflinching, her presence commanding the room like a seasoned leader addressing her troops. She took a step closer, her voice lowering to a razor-sharp edge. "I've spent my life serving this country, defending the freedoms you take for granted, and standing up to bullies who think their power makes them superior. You might think you can intimidate me, but I've faced far greater threats than your empty arrogance. Now, do the right thing, or this situation will escalate beyond your control." Barrett's face reddened, his composure slipping as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Finally, he bent down, muttering curses under his breath as he picked up the spilled items. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, and Alexandra turned away, her calm demeanor intact, though her heart raced with adrenaline. As she walked toward the checkout, a young woman approached her, phone in hand. "Ma'am, that was incredible. Who are you?" Alexandra smiled faintly. "Just someone who believes in doing what's right," she replied. The incident quickly went viral, sparking conversations about accountability, abuse of power, and the importance of integrity in positions of authority. For Alexandra, it was just another day standing up for justice, a fight she was always ready to face. "You're judging the wrong person," Alexandra Hayes said, her voice soft but laced with unmistakable power. Her calm tone belied the storm of indignation building within her. "You might not realize it, Officer Barrett, but the way you behave now will have consequences. Not just for me, but for you." Barrett smirked, his arrogance radiating. He didn't believe her words, dismissing them with a wave of his hand as if she were a mere inconvenience. Yet behind Alexandra's composed exterior, anger and resolve simmered. This wasn't just a petty argument. This was a moment to defend the principles she had spent her entire career upholding. Principles that people like Barrett trampled on without a second thought. As Barrett stood there, his mocking smile unchanged, Alexandra stared back with piercing intensity. Her gaze was cold, steady, and unyielding. She felt the quiet tension in the air as the crowd watched the unfolding drama with bated breath. Barrett, tall and imposing, seemed to relish the attention, but Alexandra, despite her smaller stature, radiated an authority that even he couldn't ignore. "I'm not here to argue," Alexandra said, her voice calm yet commanding. "But let me remind you that your actions don't just affect others. They define who you are. As a police officer, your responsibilities go beyond enforcing laws. You're supposed to be a role model, a protector. Right now, all I see is someone abusing their position." Her words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd grew quieter, their focus now entirely on the confrontation. Barrett shifted his weight, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He tried to mask his discomfort with laughter, his voice echoing mockingly through the supermarket aisle. "Responsibility?" he sneered, leaning in closer. "Who do you think you are? Just some random woman trying to lecture me. Don't act like you have the right to tell me what to do. You don't know a damn thing about my job." Barrett's voice dripped with disdain, his words weaponized with both sexism and thinly veiled racism. The insult stung, but Alexandra didn't let it show. Instead, she took a deep breath, centering herself. Years of commanding troops in life-or-death situations had taught her that calmness and composure were more powerful than anger. "I don't need you to understand who I am," Alexandra replied, her tone steady and deliberate. But I do need you to understand this. Everyone in this society deserves to be treated with dignity. And if you can't uphold that, then you don't deserve to wear that badge." Barrett's smirk widened into a grin of defiance. "What do you think you're going to do? I'm a cop. The law's on my side. You're just another ordinary woman, another nobody. You'd better think twice before you get yourself into trouble." The air grew heavy with tension. His words weren't just an insult, they were a challenge, daring her to back down. But Alexandra didn't flinch. The crowd watched, their murmurs fading into an uneasy silence. This wasn't just a personal clash anymore, it had become a battle of principles, a confrontation between arrogance and integrity. Alexandra stood taller, her posture as firm as a soldier standing at attention. Her gaze burned with determination. She had faced men like Barrett before, people who hid behind their authority to justify their actions. She knew this was no time to falter. "You may think your badge makes you untouchable," Alexandra said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "But arrogance and contempt don't hide moral failings, they magnify them. If you continue down this path, you'll find that the power you cling to is meaningless." For the first time, Barrett's confidence wavered. He frowned, his bravado beginning to crack under Alexandra's steady resolve. He scanned her face for any sign of fear or hesitation, but found none. She was as immovable as a mountain, her presence a stark contrast to his blustering arrogance. Barrett took a step forward, attempting to reassert control over the situation. "Don't try to act noble," he snarled, his voice louder now. "You're nothing but a troublemaker. If I wanted to, I could throw you out of here right now." Alexandra didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward as well, her voice calm but razor sharp. "You can try to intimidate me, but let me make one thing clear. I'm not here to fight for power, and I'm not here to win an argument. I'm here to hold you accountable for abusing your position, and I won't stop until you face the consequences of your actions." The crowd watched in awe, the tension in the supermarket palpable. Some customers held their phones up, recording the confrontation, while others whispered in hushed tones. Barrett's once smug expression now betrayed unease. His confidence was crumbling, piece by piece. "You can insult me all you want," Alexandra continued, her voice unwavering. "But remember this, I'm not standing here alone. These people are watching. The law is watching. And when this is over, it won't be me who regrets today. It'll be you." Barrett froze, his bravado completely shattered. He glanced around at the crowd, seeing their disapproving faces and realizing he had underestimated his opponent. Alexandra Hayes wasn't just another customer. She was a force of nature, standing firm against injustice with the strength of a seasoned commander. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of Alexandra's words hanging in the air. Barrett didn't respond. He simply stood there, exposed and uncertain, as the crowd waited to see what would happen next. The supermarket aisle felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, the silence deafening as tension hung heavy in the air. Officer Barrett snarled, his voice laced with frustration as he tried to claw back control of the situation. "Don't act noble with me," he barked, his face flushed with anger. "You're nothing but a troublemaker. If I wanted, I could throw you out of here right now." Alexandra Hayes stood firm, her calm exterior betraying none of the fire building within her. Her lips curved slightly in a near imperceptible twitch, not a smile, but a frightening calmness that made the crowd hold their breath. "If you think your badge gives you the power to behave like this, you're gravely mistaken," she said, her voice as steady as granite. "You're wrong to believe I would be afraid of you." The aisle felt frozen in time, the tension thick enough to slice through. Barrett loomed large, his broad shoulders and aggressive posture radiating a false sense of dominance. Alexandra, by contrast, was smaller, her white shirt and casual jeans blending into the background of everyday life. But there was nothing ordinary about her. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, exuded a quiet authority that seemed to shrink Barrett with every second. "You can continue to insult me," Alexandra said, her voice calm but cutting like a blade. "But remember, I'm not standing here alone. Look around. There are witnesses. If you think you can use your words or power to silence me, you're mistaken. I'm not here to defend my honor. I'm here to defend the values I've spent my entire life protecting." The supermarket fell into an eerie silence. The crowd, though subdued, was unmistakably on Alexandra's side. Some had their phones up, recording every second, while others whispered among themselves, their faces etched with disapproval aimed squarely at Barrett. Despite his outward bravado, Barrett's confidence was cracking. His tough appearance could no longer mask the growing unease in his eyes as he realized the crowd was no longer indifferent bystanders. They were witnesses. Alexandra remained steadfast, a beacon of resolve in a storm of injustice. Barrett, now visibly unnerved, took a step forward, his voice rising in aggression. "I'm warning you, don't make this worse for yourself. I'm the police, and I have the authority to deal with you however I see fit." His words rang out like a threat, a final attempt to intimidate. But instead of cowering, Alexandra's determination only deepened. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her movements were not hurried, but decisive, every action calculated to show she wasn't intimidated. "You may have authority," she said, her voice soft but steely, "but I have rights. Let's see on whose side the law truly stands." With calm efficiency, Alexandra dialed a number and spoke into the phone, her tone unwavering. "Hello, I need immediate assistance at the downtown supermarket. There is a police officer here abusing his power and threatening the public. I request immediate intervention." Barrett's smug demeanor evaporated as the reality of the situation sank in. His eyes widened, darting nervously around the crowd that was no longer just observing, but actively recording and calling for backup. The whispers in the supermarket grew louder, a swell of collective outrage bubbling to the surface. "What do you think you're doing?" Barrett roared, taking another menacing step toward Alexandra. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "I'm doing what you should have done, standing up for fairness and accountability," she said, her voice firm and deliberate. At that moment, the sound of sirens pierced the tense atmosphere, their wails growing louder as police cars arrived outside the supermarket. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a path as uniformed officers entered the building. Their presence shifted the dynamic instantly, the tension escalating to its peak. Alexandra raised her hand and pointed directly at Barrett, her gaze never wavering. "This is the officer in question," she said, her tone calm yet unrelenting. "Every action he's taken has been documented and witnessed." Barrett's face turned pale, his usual arrogance dissolving into panic. The officers glanced at the crowd, noting the raised phones and the sea of disapproving faces. Barrett's confidence was gone, replaced by a dawning realization that his actions were no longer defensible. As the lead officer approached, Alexandra remained composed, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Barrett's crumbling facade. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady. "It's about ensuring that those in power use it responsibly, to serve and protect, not to oppress." The lead officer nodded solemnly, turning to Barrett with an unreadable expression. "Officer Barrett, step aside," he ordered, his voice firm. Barrett hesitated, but the weight of the moment forced him to comply. The crowd, now emboldened, erupted in murmurs of approval. Barrett was led away, his towering figure seeming smaller with every step he took. Meanwhile, Alexandra stood tall, the quiet strength of her resolve shining brighter than ever. The crowd looked at her with admiration, their earlier fear replaced by a newfound hope. Justice had arrived, and Alexandra had proven that even in the face of abuse and prejudice, courage and integrity would always prevail. The supermarket buzzed with hushed whispers and the quiet hum of phones recording the unfolding scene. Paul Barrett, once exuding arrogance and power, now stood frozen, the weight of his crumbling confidence visible in his stiff posture. His bravado evaporated, replaced by confusion and anxiety. He glanced around desperately, but the silent judgment from the crowd was deafening. Meanwhile, Alexandra Hayes remained unyielding, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the officer's faltering composure. She had anticipated this moment, knowing her courage and unwavering resolve would see her through. The supermarket doors swung open with a dramatic creak, and in walked Mayor Henry Preston, a towering figure of authority and poise. His sharp gaze swept through the room, landing squarely on Alexandra. The tension in the air thickened, every eye in the room shifting to the mayor's commanding presence. His footsteps echoed decisively, each step a harbinger of justice as he approached the heart of the confrontation. Paul Barrett, who moments earlier had barked orders with unshakable confidence, now looked as if the ground beneath him might swallow him whole. His face, once flush with arrogance, was pale and drawn. "Mr. Mayor," he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean anything. It's just that she—" "Enough!" Mayor Preston interrupted, his voice low, yet sharp enough to cut through the silence. He raised a hand to silence Barrett, his tone dripping with authority. "Save your excuses. I'm here because I received an urgent call from Colonel Alexandra Hayes, a woman whose service and integrity command my utmost respect. Your behavior has been witnessed, recorded, and reported. Don't think your flimsy justifications will erase the damage you've done." Barrett's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. The room stood still, the crowd captivated by the unfolding drama. Alexandra remained calm, her unwavering stance a reminder of her purpose, not personal vengeance, but a stand for justice. Mayor Preston turned to Alexandra, his piercing gaze softening as he addressed her. "Colonel Hayes," he said, his voice tinged with respect, "I hope you're unharmed. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable and will be dealt with immediately." Alexandra nodded, her voice steady but resolute. "Thank you, Mayor Preston. I'm fine. But this isn't just about me. It's about accountability for those in positions of power. If I hadn't stood my ground today, who knows how many others would have been subjected to the same mistreatment." The mayor's expression darkened as he turned back to Barrett, his tone chillingly calm. "You've abused your authority, insulted a decorated officer, and disgraced the uniform you wear. You've lost the trust of the people you swore to protect, and you don't deserve to wear that badge." The crowd murmured in agreement, their whispers growing louder as a woman stepped forward from the crowd, her phone in hand. "I have video evidence," she said, her voice firm. "It shows everything he said and did." Mayor Preston took the phone, watching the footage with a grave expression. When he looked up, his face was set with determination. "This behavior will not be tolerated," he declared. He turned to the officers who had arrived on the scene. "Strip him of his badge and weapon immediately. An investigation will be opened, and he will face the full consequences of his actions." The officers moved to carry out the orders as Barrett stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, erupted into applause, their cheers filling the supermarket. The moment felt like justice being served, a triumph for integrity over abuse. Alexandra, though she sought no glory, felt a profound sense of relief. She knew the fight wasn't over, but this victory was a step toward greater accountability. As Mayor Preston turned back to her, his expression softened once more. "Colonel Hayes," he said, his voice steady, "this city needs people like you. People who remind us of the responsibilities that come with power. Thank you for standing up for what's right." Alexandra met his gaze, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mayor. I just hope this sparks real change." "It will," the mayor replied, his tone resolute. "We'll make sure of it." As Alexandra stepped outside into the sunlight, a wave of quiet pride washed over her. The battle for fairness and accountability was far from over, but she was ready to continue the fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced or oppressed. In her heart, she knew this moment was just the beginning. Paul Barrett sat in the back of the police car, the weight of his arrogance crushed under the weight of his newfound reality. The once confident officer who had towered over others with his abuse of authority now sat slumped, his face pale, eyes darting in every direction, as if searching for a way to escape the inevitable. As the car pulled away from the supermarket, the crowd outside remained rooted in place, their whispers sharp and damning. The recording phones had stopped, but their critical gazes lingered like specters following him. At the precinct, Paul's fall from grace became a spectacle. Video evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and damning reports poured in from every corner. Each piece of evidence painted a vivid picture of a man who had let the power of his badge cloud his sense of duty. The precinct's head, Chief Marissa Grant, was waiting in the interrogation room when Paul was brought in. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, bore into him as he fumbled with excuses. "Paul Barrett," she began, her voice sharp and cutting, "your actions have not only disgraced yourself, but tarnished the trust this department has worked so hard to rebuild. Your behavior is a stain, one we cannot afford." Paul opened his mouth to protest, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "Save it. The videos speak louder than any excuse you can muster." Within hours, Mayor Henry Preston's announcement solidified Paul's fate. He was officially suspended, pending an internal investigation. The mayor's words reverberated across social media, where the public demanded accountability. The footage of Paul's confrontation with Alexandra Hayes spread like wildfire, igniting a national debate on the abuse of power and systemic prejudice in law enforcement. The backlash was swift and unrelenting. The videos, accompanied by the hashtag #Justice with Alexandra, garnered millions of views. Individuals who had faced similar treatment at the hands of Paul began coming forward, their stories pouring fuel onto the already blazing fire of public outrage. Former colleagues who had once respected Paul now distanced themselves, their disappointment palpable. In his small, dimly lit home, Paul sat alone, his head in his hands. The walls that had once displayed his commendations now seemed to mock him, their silent presence a stark reminder of what he had lost. The weight of his actions bore down on him, each passing hour forcing him to confront the bitter reality of his downfall. His phone buzzed incessantly, but the calls and messages were not ones of support. They were condemnations, reminders of his disgrace. Meanwhile, Alexandra Hayes returned to her life with quiet determination. She rejected the labels of hero and icon that the media and public thrust upon her, seeing her actions as nothing more than her duty. However, her courage had sparked something far greater than she anticipated. She became a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those fighting against injustice. Invited to speak at numerous seminars and events, Alexandra shared her story not to bask in applause, but to remind others of the responsibility that comes with power. True strength, she often said, standing before crowds of enraptured listeners, lies in using power to protect, not to oppress. Leadership is about service, not domination. Her words resonated deeply. Local police departments began re-evaluating their training programs and recruitment processes. Ethics and accountability became focal points, with mandatory workshops being implemented. Alexandra's involvement in these initiatives further cemented her legacy as an agent of change. As for Paul Barrett, his career in law enforcement was over. Stripped of his badge and authority, he faced legal charges, including abuse of power and threats of violence. The courtroom, once a place where he wielded influence, became the stage for his public reckoning. With his head bowed, the arrogance that had once defined him was replaced by shame. The community turned its back on Paul, his name now synonymous with everything wrong in law enforcement. Alone and ostracized, he was left to grapple with the bitter lesson that power, when abused, not only destroys others, but also leads to self-destruction. For Alexandra, life went on with purpose. She continued her work in the military and community, serving as a reminder that courage and integrity can dismantle even the deepest-rooted injustices. Articles, interviews, and videos documenting her bravery continued to inspire others to speak out and stand firm against oppression. Her impact was undeniable. She had not only brought justice to one situation, but had also sparked a movement that demanded accountability and respect in every corner of society. Her legacy, built on the values of honor and service, served as a guiding light for future generations, reminding them that true power lies in standing up for what is right. In the months following the dramatic confrontation at the Austin supermarket, Alexandra Hayes became a symbol of resilience and accountability. Her courage in standing up to an abusive officer became the catalyst for broader conversations about racism and abuse of power in law enforcement. For Alexandra, however, it was never about the attention. It was about the values she had fought to defend throughout her life. Alexandra didn't see herself as a hero. Instead, she believed she had simply done what was necessary to challenge a system that had allowed prejudice to thrive unchecked. She reflected on that day, not with regret, but with a quiet pride, knowing that her actions had sparked meaningful change in her community. But for her, this wasn't the end. It was a call to action, a reminder that the fight for justice is never over. As stories of Alexandra's bravery spread, they ignited a wave of inspiration. Articles and videos of the incident circulated far and wide, shedding light on the challenges faced by marginalized communities. Her unwavering determination in the face of adversity resonated particularly with women and people of color, who often felt invisible in the fight for equality. To them, Alexandra was more than a symbol. She was a trailblazer who reminded them that standing up against injustice was both possible and necessary. In the weeks following the incident, Alexandra was invited to speak at town halls, community gatherings, and police reform workshops. Her message was always the same. Power is only meaningful when it is used to protect and serve the community, not to oppress and abuse. Integrity, she would say, is the foundation of true leadership. Without it, power becomes a weapon, not a shield. Her speeches were more than words. They were a rallying cry. At one such event, Alexandra stood before an audience of law enforcement officers, community leaders, and citizens. She spoke with passion, recounting her experience and the lessons it had taught her. That day in the supermarket, she said, her voice steady and resolute, was not about me. It was about the values we must all uphold. If those entrusted with authority use it to demean rather than uplift, we all suffer. The impact of her words was profound. Police departments across the region began re-evaluating their practices. Mandatory training programs focused on bias, ethics, and accountability were introduced. Recruitment processes were scrutinized to ensure that only those committed to upholding the law with fairness and integrity were accepted. Alexandra didn't stop at influencing policies. She personally attended workshops to share her insights and encourage open dialogue between law enforcement and the communities they served. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Alexandra's actions continued to grow. People who had suffered in silence found the courage to speak out. Community members began organizing forums to share their stories, demand justice, and push for systemic change. Alexandra became a frequent presence at these events, offering support and reminding everyone that their voices mattered. Her slogan, "Every voice can make a difference," became a rallying cry for a growing movement. As for Paul Barrett, the disgraced officer, his life had taken a sharp turn. Stripped of his badge and facing legal consequences, he was forced to confront the full weight of his actions. The trial was swift and decisive, with the court finding him guilty of abusing his authority. The once proud officer who had wielded his power carelessly now stood before the world as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that arrogance and prejudice have no place in positions of authority. In contrast, Alexandra's influence only grew. Her actions sparked a broader movement, one that extended beyond Austin and reached national conversations about justice and accountability. Schools and community organizations invited her to speak, eager for her wisdom and perspective. She never sought fame, but her humility and authenticity earned her widespread respect. For Alexandra, the fight for justice was never about personal recognition. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to face the kind of injustice she had witnessed. She often said, "Change doesn't come from waiting for someone else to act. It comes from each of us standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept the unacceptable." Her legacy wasn't just in the policies that changed or the conversations she started. It was in the lives she touched, the courage she inspired, and the hope she ignited. Alexandra Hayes had become a beacon of light in a world that often felt overshadowed by darkness. And as she continued her work, she remained steadfast in her belief that integrity, courage, and compassion could change the world, one step at a time. In the heart of a city where voices of the powerless often go unheard, Emma Miller stood as a beacon of hope. The injustices she witnessed drove her into a relentless mission, inspiring individuals to challenge oppression head-on. Emma no longer carried the cautious demeanor she once wore. Instead, she was emboldened by a fiery determination. Each action she took reverberated like ripples in still water, proving that change begins with a single courageous step. Emma knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the silenced, the marginalized communities who felt crushed under the weight of systemic abuse. "Justice isn't a privilege," she declared in a fiery address to a packed auditorium. "It's a right that no one should be denied." Her words struck like lightning, igniting a room filled with suppressed frustration and unspoken dreams of equality. This movement wasn't easy. Threats loomed, resistance built, and allies wavered. Yet Emma stood firm, knowing every voice that joined her was a crack in the wall of oppression. As her influence grew, so did the message. Power only matters when it lifts others, not when it crushes them. The story of Emma Miller teaches us a powerful lesson. True strength lies in standing up for justice, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It reminds us that silence in the face of oppression only enables abuse of power, while courage and solidarity can ignite meaningful change. In today's world, where discrimination and systemic injustices persist, we must embrace the responsibility to challenge wrongs and demand accountability. Every voice, no matter how small, has the potential to create ripples of transformation. Remember, power is only meaningful when used to protect and uplift others, not to oppress or demean.